here's our situation. We're obviously we're in a better situation than many of our people on both sides of the Atlantic appreciate. But the real situation for the world is grave. That's the difference. There's some pessimism I picked up here about our opportunities. For example, some people have written off the hope of anything from Ireland, which I think is a great mistake on their part. It's trying to make a linear projection from trend lines of what has happened up to now. And we're now entering a period which I think all of you must recognize, that what has happened up to now as a linear tracking has no relevance to what's going to happen tomorrow morning or the day after. So if you're trying to draw a conclusion from a trend line, from a recent date up to the present moment, you're not thinking clearly. You have to realize that we're on a breaking development. First of all, there's some doubt as to whether the world system is going to make it through the end of this year. That already as we approach Christmas, you're having a crisis situation come into play now. And every part of the world is ready to explode. So that the tendency to draw a trend line and try to figure out where you're going to be tomorrow on the basis of where you've been up to now. And what you have to deal with now is you're in a sudden situation where anything can break at any time. Or at least it would seem so to you if you're looking at it from a so-called statistical approach to history. Take your statistical book and throw it away. It has no relevance to the current situation. We're on the verge of a breakout of something which has no precedent. You see, people think of statistics. They always think of statistics. They think of forecasting. They're told to think of that. And the nature of the present situation is what is about to happen has no precedent. Don't try to think statistically, because you're up to a point where the rules of the game are suddenly about to change radically, and there is no statistical indication of what the change will be. There is no possibility presently that the present world monetary financial system will continue along a present trend line. We're up to a breaking point where suddenly you might have tomorrow nobody knows what money is, because nobody recognizes money in its present form. You can be in a hyperinflationary blowout at almost any time, corresponding to what happened in Germany in the fall of 1923. It's your most comparable statistical fact is Germany in the autumn of 1923, and probably some date earlier than December of 1923. And therefore, you have to think about you're approaching a complete breakdown crisis of the entire international system. And the breakdown crisis is immediately located in the transatlantic system. It is centered on the British system, which is on the verge of a breakdown, but more significantly, the inter-alpha group, which is the dominant part of the international monetary financial system, is in a breakdown crisis. It is going from Ireland, which is still firm-lending, and the situation in Ireland from a statistical standpoint is unpredictable. Anybody in Europe or in the United States who thinks that the Irish situation is a settled situation or a fixed trend line is an idiot and should stop being an idiot. The total world system in this period is going to break down. The only thing that is uncertain is the exact date. The only thing that could change these dates, whatever it is, would be a change in policy. a radical change from the existing international policies, a radical change from U.S. policy, or a radical change in European policy. You have also a potential shift which would crack everything wide open, which is the Russian issue. Russia is now financially, and in terms of international finances, is tied to the so-called BRIC policy, which is a sort of a joke that they invented, but it wasn't a joke. So if Russia decides that the United States economy, the U.S. dollar, is going to break down, and that the Western European, Central European situation is going to go through a crisis of the Euro system, then the Russians will tend to move out of the Euro system connection, as well as the dollar system connection. But first, the Euro system connection, the British connection. That would trigger an immediate breakdown of the world system. Because the minute you get a weakening of the transatlantic system, that means the world economy now shifts to dependency on what happens in the Asian sector. That does not mean that the Asian sector is going to come up with a triumph over the transatlantic sector. It will seem to be a triumph for a moment, but it's only relative. It's like an epidemic has struck and 50% of the world's population has been wiped out, and the other 50% that's remaining says, cheery, whoopee, we won. But where the epidemic is still running loose and accelerating. So I think I've got it from here, and I've got it that is from here in Europe, and I've got it from also from partly in the United States. A delusion, a statistical delusion, that somehow this system, this financial monetary system, is going to continue, and that you have to define what is going to happen in terms of the conditionalities of the existing reigning world monetary systems, respectively, because they're not quite the same thing in the United States or in and Europe. So you have a system which is based on a component set of systems. The whole shebang is on the verge of a general breakdown crisis of society. Part of the factor here is that the breakdown crisis is intended. The intention of the Anglo-American combination right now is to organize genocide to reduce the world's population to down to the order of magnitude of 1 billion people. All of the policy trends in the Anglo-American community as a whole are now committed to trends in economic and related policy which have the goal over the medium term as opposed to long term, in other words, over the immediate years ahead, or the immediate couple of generations ahead, in the longest aspect of this thing, to reduce within 2 or 3 generations the present level of world population to less than 1 billion people. That is what the trend is. So don't give me any trend lines. Obviously, that trend is itself the major issue on this planet, whether people recognize it or not. We're looking at the death, mass death of nations as well as the populations of nations. The intention is that. This is not an accident. This is not a trend. This is an intention. And if you don't get the current president of the United States out of the office, that's going to be the intention of the United States. That's the intention of the new Republican majority coming into the Congress in the first of the year, is genocide against the U.S. population. And there is nothing else being proposed. There's no other commitment under this administration. Now, you cannot have genocide or genocide program based on economic conditions. by manipulating economic conditions, which does not cause a breakdown crisis of the system. A hyperinflationary breakdown crisis of the entire U.S. system and the transatlantic system is now what is in progress. The key to this is the breakdown crisis of the United States. You're getting a breakdown crisis of the economy of the United States, which is a deliberate policy of the current presidency and of Wall Street and of London. This is the only trend that is operating in political terms today. Therefore, if you do not get rid of this president and get a new president called in from the vice squad, that's what the new meeting for vice president is, the vice squad. He's got to arrest the president or something, or give the president an arresting change in his conditions. Right. So that's what we have. That's what we are. Do not try to deduce trends from current monetary trends or political trends. You know that most of Americans, from the Congress on down, are not in the real universe. That the policies of the Congress, the policies of the leading institutions of government of the United States today is destructive. The policy of the British government is destructive. The trend is destruction. And this goes back to the old Islamic issue of the destruction of the destruction of the destruction. What destroyed Islam was the destruction, which was then a Turkish policy. And then you had an effort from Spain and from Iran to destroy the destruction. And then there was a reply from Turkey calling for the destruction of the destruction of the destruction. And this led to a great crisis throughout Europe, which had another aspect of it later, which was the great crisis from 1492 to 1648. And you have a European system which is committed to what? A post-Westphalian perspective. What's the difference? All recovery of Europe, which did recover, was under a Westphalian system. Now, if you say you're going to destroy the Westphalian system, which is what the European Union policy is now, as dictated by Britain, combined with the transatlantic policy of an alliance, a cooperation with Britain and the Obama administration and the fascist Republican elements, as well as a few fascist Democrats, in fact, means that we're headed toward hell. We're headed toward hell, which is intended to be the characteristic of this entire century, the remainder of this entire century. And you want to draw a trend line? You want to ride the trend of current events? You want to be the wise guy who has the inside dope on the trend in current events? You want to plan your financial investments based on the long-term trend in current events? The term you use usually for saying to the ordinary public, it's a public opinion, well, let me tell you, asshole, something, which is the right answer for that question. What about current trend? You're going against current trends. That's right, brother and sister. We're going against current trends. And current trends do not feed the mouth. They deal with a completely different organ. I think that's what I wanted to stress right now from where I stand here or sit here, is that the curse we have is the popular wishful dream that they can deduce something good for them out of riding a horse of current events. And all they're picking about is trying to find out which horse in a stable full of dying horses, they're going to ride. I'm reminded of my own fantasy when I was sitting on the hillside opposite Florence across the Arno. And I was on a higher slope, so I could look down right into the streets, which in the region of that city, which was saw the mayor's palace. And I could see in the streets, and I could see just exactly where the reports of dead bodies collected on the sidewalks and carts full of dead bodies being carried away. That's the trend line. It's a trend line now. And only a willful change in policy, initiated by our confident efforts, by our intervention against the trend, and that's what you should be telling to those people out there. You want to know what the trend is? I'll tell you what the trend is. The way it's going, you're all dead soon. Now, we think we ought to go against the trend, don't you? That's your message. Our problem lies with the broader part of the population, including many of the elected or recently diselected politicians, especially those who are still in office pending the change of the year. The demoralization in the larger part of the population, see, people who represent my generation or something close to it, especially those with scientific and related kinds of capabilities, will tend to respond to what we're doing because it's in their nature to do so. It's in their deeply embedded nature to do so. Now, you have younger generations who are deeply embedded in something else, which we may not like to discuss unduly here. Your problem is, how do you deal with them as opposed to how you are dealing with the older generation of more skilled people? What you have to do is confide in them. The first thing to say is, look, we've got a situation out there, as you know, to any of these people, the typical person. We've got a situation out there, which you know is that our population, from many leading politicians on the way down, all the way down to the most obscure, the poorest educated, the poorest informed, who have one common feature right now. The result of the last election and the result of what the Democratic Party didn't do before the election has most people in this nation demoralized. And people are speaking incompetently out from their own demoralization. Why are they demoralized? Because the performance of the entire Congress, the entire U.S. Congress, before the election was one of self-induced demoralization. The people of the United States had the power, if mobilized, to have changed the course of this society, to change the course of life in the United States from pessimism to recovery. We had the resources. We had people who wanted those results. But we had politicians who were scared bunnies who wouldn't fight and say, wait till the next election. Now, we have a problem out there. I'm sure that many of you people out there, you can tell them. You can tell them from me, I know you're demoralized. I know you're demoralized because your fellow citizens are demoralized. And you're demoralized because you know your politicians have been no damn good. Why are they no damn good? Because they're cowardly. Even figures who are otherwise would be courageous leaders are acting like stinking cowards. They're crawling. They're not like Congressman Rangel, who showed himself to be a fighter. He tried to fight tactically within the rules of the game of the institution within which he's working. And he's working also in other institutions. Rangel is also working in the institution of the people who support him for the Congress. He's also has a constituency which is in the Congress. What's the difference? The people out there still support him and trust him with good reason. Does he trust his own constituency in the Congress? No. Is he right? Yes. Are they trustworthy? No. Well, don't you think that maybe since these congressmen have the power, if they want to use it, to do something about your life and your future with their power as government, don't you think that they should be called upon to represent you instead of representing Obama or representing fascism? Don't you think that your being pessimistic is the worst thing you could do for yourself? Don't you know and recognize that if you would stand up and fight as citizens and ream your congressman and tell him he's a gutless coward, and tell the guy who's just been elected to the Republican Party, you don't want that son of a bitch anywhere near you. You don't want him in your neighborhood. Tell him to go away someplace. He wants to be a Republican congressman, let him go to Brazil. Let him do his voting from Brazil, where it's about to crash down there too. He should go on a vacation. Send them all on a vacation to Brazil. They will probably like the sex life out down there. I don't know what it's like, but we got some interesting reports down there about people who outwitted themselves, shall we say. No, you have to go out and tell the people that they're demoralized. I know you're demoralized. Our reports are that most Americans out there are demoralized. Why are they demoralized? Well, because their own fellow citizens voted like stupid jerks to bring in this Republican landslide or turd slide. And I think our protest to be that on the one hand you have, as just stated, you have on one hand you have people who are older generation, who are with us, who are skilled, who have confidence because they have the skills to do things. You have people who are in the Congress who should have courage, they don't. And there's a reciprocal lack of courage and lack of respect of the lack of courage by the congressman and the lack of spirit by the citizen. Therefore, you, instead of trying to ride the trend of pessimism, ride the trend of cowardice, you must inspire the citizens to face the truth. We and they share a terrible thing of systems of government which no longer have the will to represent the cause of survival of civilization. And the only way we're going to change that is by having the citizens give up this damn pessimism and determine to act in sufficient unison to build a bonfire under the rear end of their so-called congressional and related representatives. You have to incite the citizens to give these guys, to warm their panties at such a temperature level that they will get up, stand up, and get out of their chair. And there's a reciprocal demoralization relationship going on between the citizens generally and members of Congress who ordinarily would be a little more courageous. Instead of trying to adapt to pessimism, is to counter the pessimism and say, we can't afford pessimism. It could kill us. Don't complain about your present. Change your future.